LIV Golf has ended its bid for OWGR points. They have withdrawn their application. Greg Norman cites, quote, the lack of willingness to work with the league. And Patrick, it seems as if the path forward for LIV Golf is going to be essentially to negotiate individually with each one of the major championships to see if they can get the qualifying criteria moved farther away from OWGR points and closer to an X number of guaranteed spots for LIV Golf.
I got to catch my breath really quick. I think both can be true in this instance of, Greg Norman said they made, quote, enormous efforts. I mean, that's just blatantly false, I would say. When OWGR, they had two main bugaboos with LIV. The main one was to close shop, and LIV came to them and said, yeah, we only have 6 guys under contract that are going to be in the league no matter what. Then they come back. They're like, actually, it's 14. Sorry about that miscalculation. Greg DuCharme, talk about math. And then they're like, but we're doing LIV promotions. We're adding 3 spots for these qualifiers. The order of merit winner, great. And then they come back and they bring in a new team. They bring in Anthony Kim. And it's like, okay, are you really putting your best foot forward? What they did do a really good job of, LIV, I would say, is kind of the smear campaign against OWGR. You have Bryson out on every podcast. You have Taylor Gooch, who was a perfect, I think, poster child for this, right? Their champion, their league year-long winner, going on every podcast, get a mic in his face. And now you have the hottest
mic in his face.
The hottest player in the world, right? The best player in the world, doing the same in Joaquin Niemann, tongue-in-cheek, criticizing the OWGR, who's run by the major championships, one of which is Augusta National, one of which just gave him an invitation to their major championship after his victory. That being said, I think it is it's somewhat baffling that there's a league out there with John Rahm, Dustin Johnson, Brooks Koepka, Bryson DeChambeau, Cameron Smith that isn't receiving points. But in the context of OWGR in this, the problem for LIV is we're not talking about those guys. We are talking about Taylor Gooch and how OWGR points is a pathway to major championships. The best thing that happened to OWGR, in my opinion, was Brooks Koepka winning the 2023 PGA Championship. Because if he doesn't do that, and if he doesn't win a major championship this year, the conversation around LIV and OWGR is completely different, because that would have been Brooks Koepka's avenue to major championships. So essentially, the OWGR has been unaffected by this. So they can sit on their hands and sit back and watch the 4 events that matter the most to them, the majors, because who runs the OWGR? The majors. And invite players like, Joaquin Niemann when they see fit. So I think both sides didn't put their best foot forward, to tell you the truth.
The interesting thing, KP, so obviously there's a lot here, but the time aspect. So this was applied for by LIV in July of 2022. They were, as Patrick alluded to, denied initially in October of 2023 with some of that feedback that Patrick was going through. We knew that it takes about 18 months on average for kind of a decision to be made. And by then, a lot of guys were not going to have enough OWGR points. It probably wasn't going to matter anyway, unless things were going to be added retroactively. The other thing about this is not to confuse why LIV wants OWGR points. I don't think LIV cares, or I don't think Bryson DeChambeau cares. Maybe Bryson does. Maybe he's a bad example. Brooks doesn't care if he's the 4th ranked player in the world, or the 40th ranked player in the world, or the 400th ranked player in the world. He cares about being in the major championships. And that was just the function of getting into the majors. If you don't have to deal with any of that and can still get your guys into majors, that's kind of the same end goal.
Yes. Which, I mean, I think sometimes we talk about the OWGR like it's been around since, the 1800s. It's very new. It's younger than I am. It's not even, when was it constructed, Greg? Like 1987?
Definitely the late 80s. I don't know the
86.
exact year. 86.
86. Okay. And so it's all made up anyway. I think the whole thing with Liv saying, oh, Bryson was on what's the Liv podcast? Fairway to Heaven.
Fairway to Heaven.
Yeah, there we go. It's like we fulfilled everything. And somebody posted like their list of requirements. They had fulfilled like 3 of the 7, like just very like basic, just math. Like just no, you don't have a minimum of 75 players on average in each event. Like you just don't. Like I don't. What do you want us to do? So what has happened is that LIV has basically just ruined the OWGR for everybody. We had this nice, like, uniform global system. Was it perfect? No. There was always tweaks being made to it. They just tweaked it 2 years ago, right? To adjust for. They added strokes gain data, which I think was a good tweak. So LIV just ruined. Like I use the OWGR to cite like, hey, Rory's the number 3 player in the world or whatever, but I don't use it in my research. I use rickrungood.com or Data Golf, right? Because I don't care about the OWGR as it's currently constructed. I care about who is actually the 7th best player in the world over the last 6 months. Like who's playing the 7th best golf or the 4th best golf or whatever. And so congrats, Liv. You ruined something else that we had that was good. Like they just and it's annoying, right? Because they just run roughshod over all these things and then they try to play the victim. And you're like, dude, you're just like, you don't care about any of this. Like you are the definition of like a selfish, self-centered entity, and you're ruining all these things for everybody else. And maybe that's the definition of a disruptor, and that's what they would call themselves, but it's super frustrating as a golf fan.
They're like the person you meet that's like, hey, I just tell it like it is. Like I'm not a butthead. I just tell it like it is. I'm that type of person.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Greg, the major championships here have continued to stay out of the fray above everything, as you know, we kind of thought they were going to do. They didn't need to get down in the mud and roll around with everybody. And now they get to sit back and say, okay, well, Joaquin Niemann, congratulations, you're in the Masters. Okay, Joaquin Niemann, congratulations, you're in the PGA Championship. They could do that and continue to invite who they believe are the best players in the world, because that's all. It also behooves them to have the deepest fields, have the best fields in golf, or they could write up, you know, top 5 LIV golfers, top 10, top whatever. They don't have to, but they have, again, the option. They're not required to do anything. They continue to be in the best position.
It's a single event. Each one of them is a single event, and they don't have to do anything they don't want to do. I mean, they do have to do whatever's necessary to preserve their credibility, and but that at the same time matches their goal. And their goal is to put the best field and put the best tournament on that they possibly can. So when they feel that somebody like a Joaquin Niemann has earned a spot and earned an invitation, they reserve the right to invite them. But they at the same time, they also have had qualifications for these major championships that have been going on for a very long time. And like the official World Golf Rankings, they've made minor tweaks when necessary. But they're in a very different position because they're not running a tour, and they don't have to contract players. They don't have to make promises to TV broadcasts that they're going to have certain players there who are qualifying based on certain, merit-based accomplishments. They don't have to do that, especially the Masters. So, and the PGA Championship doesn't even use official World Golf Rankings. They use PGA Championship points. They have their own criteria for allowing players into majors. And that's something they all can do if they deem that to be necessary. So you're absolutely right, Rick. The majors sit in a position that is that's well above the rest of the entities because they have the best events. Everybody wants to play in them. and nobody is fighting about, whether they should play or whether the majors do things the right way. And there's a couple of hollers here and there, but those just seem to come from people who haven't found their way in the tournament.
KP, I mean, I don't want to spark like an hour-long conversation here, but something Greg just said is kind of the secret to all of this. Everybody wants to play the major championships. Everybody wants to be in them. We have said before they could offer $0 in purses and get everybody to show up whenever they want. Yet here we are being driven by how much money they can make, who's going to give them the best opportunity to do that, when if every event, and I don't know if this is possible, is it possible that every event or 20 events could feel like major championships where, we talked about the PGA Tour not leaning into legacy and whatever else that they had that could not just be tied to funds. But I think it's so fascinating that the two conversations we have are, it doesn't matter if the major championships paid anything, every single guy would show up, versus here's where I need to go to make sure I'm getting as much money as possible.
Yeah. Well, it's what you're describing is and this is true in other sports too, right? Like guys they're not playing in the playoffs, like NFL and NBA playoffs, for money. They are signing with a team in the regular season for the most part, for like with money as the primary objective. So I think it's not that different if you think about regular season golf being the PGA Tour and the major championships being the sort of golf playoffs. No offense to the FedEx Cup, but I wrote about this in the normal sport newsletter today that just went out. There's such a disconnect, Rick, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this. There's such a disconnect between regular season and postseason being the major championships. Like those two, because they're run, we've talked about this a million times, but because they're run by such different organizations, 5 different organizations, 6 now, if we're throwing 7, if we're throwing the European Tour in there and LIV, are running all these different things, and there's no connection between regular season and postseason. In the NFL, everything, and the NFL is a bad example because it's team sport. It's the most popular sport in the United States. It gets all the eyeballs, whatever, but everything is aligned in the NFL. Everything points toward the Super Bowl, from the draft to offseason, training camp, preseason, everything that you're pointing toward the Super Bowl. And in golf, it's like, well, this is kind of over here and that's over there. And we've got Anthony Kim, but we still want OWGR points. And we've got this YouTube competition to get into the Myrtle Beach tournament on the PGA Tour. No offense, Patrick, I know you're a big Myrtle Beach guy. And nothing is aligned. And I keep going back. I mentioned in the newsletter today, Rick, your like world tour, there has to be some sort of alignment. Otherwise, we're just going to be talking about such separate entities all the time and with absolutely no connection whatsoever. And I think that's why everything feels so like disconnected and jarring right now, because it is disconnected and jarring right now.
One of my biggest fears for professional golf is, and I've said this before, is that it goes the way of professional boxing, which is you are the WBO champ, but you're not the WBC champ. You're the, whatever, right? There's all these different entities and you've got to win all the belts to be the unified heavyweight champion of the world. And it just diminishes everything along the way, as opposed to having, in North American sports, like you said, KP, everything pointing to one direction, or in other systems globally, a Premier League, a relegation, a promotion, that all makes sense. It points in the right direction. It allows for context at every single level, as opposed to just having 4 one-off events here, a couple of one-off events over there, 25 in the middle that may or may not matter.